brand identity is such an important piece. I think how you go in the long run, who you are, how consumers resonate with you, it needs to be almost like at heartbeat. I think taking that time up front, and then sometimes it might feel like there's so much going on and tight. But I would just say take that time to step back and look at how do you want to be sitting now, 5 years time, because I think it's getting that tight and the energy up front will be so important.
Today, we're talking all about how you can define and refine your brand identity to resonate with your audiences. We discuss why your brand identity is so crucial, how you can build it to remain consistent through personnel changes, and how it ultimately increases trust with your audience. We're so honoured to have Aman Kler on the podcast, who is the Global Senior Brand Manager at Ella's Kitchen. She has a wealth of experience across numerous industries, from FMCG to entertainment, and has helped grow new brands as well as scale existing ones to new heights. I'm Anshika, the founder of Eternity, a CRM designed for businesses operating in the wedding and events industry, and I'm so excited to be hosting the Bay Lab podcast today. Let's get into it. Thank you so much, Aman, for joining us on today's episode of the Bay Lab podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and talk all things brand identity. So let's just get into it. What is a brand identity for any startup founder or business owner watching? What do they really need to think of when they think brand identity?
So brand identity is your brand image. It's how you want to be perceived by customers, businesses, but also the world around you. And this is beyond just the logo. It's emotional, but also visual elements that you see. So it's almost like your own personality. Like you have your traits, certain way you speak, how you look, your values, your purpose. That makes you, and that's your identity. Exactly the same for a brand as well.
I love how you said personality there, because it really then mirrors and resonates to how you would want people to be talking about you, perhaps when you're not in the room. That's very similar to how your brand comes across, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if I said to you, for instance, a brand that is red and has a golden arches, instantly what brand comes to mind?
Absolutely, McDonald's. We all know it.
And that is a great example of a brand that's known worldwide. It's got that same identity across every market. It just shows how consistency is so important. That kind of identity is so important as a brand. You know who they are, you know what your guests are doing, and that same tone of voice across everything that you see them with.
Absolutely. And I know so many business owners watching and founders aspire to be the next McDonald's, where you can really have that brand identity in place. But a lot of us are still in our early stages. And I think sometimes it's a bit harder to define your brand identity. So why would you say it's really important for founders to actually prioritize that in and amongst everything else at the early stages? And how would they really sustain it and grow it?
Yeah. So for me, brand, it's the starter. It's the foundation, who you are as a brand, because almost getting it right will help you in the long run. And to give you an example of where I am right now, it all started as a startup back in 2006, where a dad had a genuine desire to feed his daughter, the future generation, healthy food that was tasty, fun, and cool. And actually, we turn up as a brand now in terms of our assets of kind of fruit and veggies, how we speak, is awesome that we live in this day now, and it's evolved slightly, but it hasn't changed. And again, it's crooks. And I think for startups especially, it's so important because it's such rich and meaningful stories and their why. And I think that's part of your brand identity when you're starting up to differentiate who you are. So the consumers, audiences recognize you as well.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that online now as well, that authenticity needs to be a really large part of brand identity. And it's a switch that I've definitely seen, and I'm sure you have, where we've gone from a certain tone of voice, which is a bit more professional, to now being more friendly, being more human. Sometimes you have a lot of emojis. I think now we're also moving into the more kind of jokey and jovial side of things. So what kind of advice would you give to a startup which needs to change their brand identity, because naturally the business is also pivoting? And so whilst their values may stay the same, the audience might change ever so slightly, or their pricing and their consumer might change. So how would you say startups should manage that side of things?
And the biggest thing is consistency. And I think taking that time up front to define who you are, like what are the values, why are you doing what you're doing, and that should be your essence of how you start thinking about your brand identity. And there's so many different layers to it. But I think that needs to be the fundamental of how.
Yeah. And are there any particular aspects that startups should prioritize, for example? So I know you've mentioned there it's the logo, it's the tone of voice, it's the appearance and the colors, but is there anything which should be prioritized earlier on and ones that potentially can come a little bit later down the line? I know you're saying they're all the foundation, but obviously for startup founders, there's so many things you need to be doing. So if you had to put it on a spectrum.
So there's three key things. One would be your brand purpose, second, your brand asset, and your third would be your kind of brand tone of voice. But they are all interlinked.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of go into each one in terms of what it looks like, how it is. And I guess fundamentally, if I was to prioritize, it would be starting with the visual assets. So obviously having one distinct brand logo, but then having about 2 to 3 visual assets that accompany that. So again, it's that consistency. So wherever you do turn up, you recognize it's this brand. So to give an example, your brand passion, everyone knows is your why. Why are you a fundamental, it's such an important piece. And it's your purpose. So that was almost where your brand identity stem from, because at least I always call it the heartbeat. It's living and breathing across everything that you do. Your second is your brand. It can also be called brand codes, or this would include logo, color palette. So for instance, I said like Tiffany's blue, you instantly recognize that color. I said characters, you almost kind of recognize the character. So Tony the tiger from Ghosties. So you've got different elements, color, characters, and also just a few visual assets, whether it supports who you are as a brand. So for LS, it's fruit and veggies, it's images of little ones. So again, what links to that? What is it? You see it, you know it's this brand, and it could be typology as well. So there's like certain fonts that you use, like Coca-Cola, of the font that you recognize anywhere, but also not packaging. That also counts as one of your distinctive assets. And again, I think of Selfridges, big kind of yellow bag.
Yeah.
You know that you recognize the brand, it evokes a certain emotion as well. And then thirdly, your tone of voice. How do you want to sound? How do you want to come across? Is it fun? Is it playful? Is it inspiring? So how do you link them all through?
Yeah.
And again, I'd say we start with, visual assets, and you can layer on from there.
Yeah, I think everything you said is so interesting. And I kept relating it down to the kind of content that I'm consuming and the new brands that I'm seeing, as well as existing ones. And I think there's this big thing that we've already touched on around authenticity. But equally, in the world of social media, we also live in a trend generation where there's so many things that are constantly changing. So one that always comes to mind for me is Duolingo, because Duolingo and how they appear on their social media and their brand voice and brand identity, some could say it really doesn't link to a language app at all. Like if you looked at it, you had no idea. But obviously you've seen that stark increase in their actual usage and their numbers and their business growth off the back of a brand identity, which perhaps doesn't tie back into their values very well, or their story directly. Definitely their values, but you can't really tell their story. And that's same with perhaps Curry's PC World, which we've seen going viral. So how would you say brands can be fun and playful, and how important is it to balance the brand identity and authenticity side of things with market trends and that growth side of things in the marketing?
Well, it's really funny you use Duolingo, because that's actually an example I use.
Yeah.
I think how their behaviors and their values are playful. It's about being fun, and actually they're always leaning into those trends, but they're very selective in terms of what trends they do and don't lean into. So if it kind of leans into and it can add what they stand for as a brand, it works. And I think that's where even for startups, it's leaning back into your values and what you stand for as a brand. Because not all trends resonate, and they won't work for you either. It needs to be what's true to you as a brand. So it's about how you want to show up, what you want to represent as well. So being clear on that up front will really help. And be selective. Like use your values. And I think it's such an important part of your brand. Use your values to guide you to which ones. And then using them to jump on certain conversations if you feel really strongly it's a brand, whether it's about sustainability, about it's almost jumping on those trends that help elevate your point of view and then your why again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. And I think where we've both touched upon Duolingo, we obviously love that as an example. They've obviously evolved a lot over time. The way that their social media started, they did used to talk a lot more about the language app side of things. And now they are, like you said, in that playful way, doing what resonates with them and their audience. Now, what advice would you give to startups in terms of what triggers a brand refresh or an identity refresh? So whether that be you're actually rebranding things like your logos, your color palette, that's one side of it. But it could be that you're keeping all of that the same and you're realizing, do you know what? We actually want to be more authentic and go down the storytelling route, or actually we want to be more inspiring founder content. How would you say brands can navigate that?
Yeah, so there are a few different elements that might trigger this. And there's quite a bit I'll get. The first one could be your business need. Like, actually, has that changed? Almost, the example that I will use totally. Oat drink, their business changed because initially when they started, it was all about people that had intolerances to query. And actually, they decided they wanted to appeal to the border and the audience, what they stood for. So they did a massive rebrand in terms of how they turn it to actually make it more mainstream and make it more mainstream. So that was an example where their business goal changed. So that's something to think through. The second would be shifting your target audience, and everything I'm going to start from there is what is your audience profile used? Are you looking to appeal to a broad audience? So actually, your brand identity right now might not really resonate with them. It might be kind of quite niche. Again, Oatly is a great example of where it did do that. It was so niche, and that's why you had to change what you were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Competitive pressures. And again, where I can you're changing its rooted in keeping your essence about who you are. Because again, you don't want to keep changing left and right depending on your competitors. But it might be is do you stand out? Or everyone allows the same colour? How do you stand out? How do you want your self-distinctiveness? How do you allow who you are, what you stand for as your brand? And then your visual identity actually something that it does change. It might get dated who we are now, 10 years ago. A lot changed, and we spoke about it. Emojis are now quite very on. But again, it might be tweaks to how you make those changes in your identity, whether it's an aspect more add new inputs. But I guess the fundamental thing would be your essence of why you do it. Does it link to those? Can you keep that one thing consistent? Then it's at least just recognizable. And I think the big kind of startups is you're a new brand, you're really kind of brand who you are, trying to make those connections with your audience. And actually, if you're constantly changing, to evolve, they don't recognize you. They're starting from scratch all free time.
Hello. Quick interruption to let you know a bit more about Bay HQ. We're the community for high growth Asian heritage entrepreneurs, operators, and investors in the UK. You can join us totally free at thebayhq.com/join. There you'll get our CEO structure in your inbox every week, which is content, events, and opportunities. You can also get access to our free Startup Fundamentals course by joining. Let's get back to the show.
Absolutely. And I think that's the tricky thing that startups face, because like you said, they are pivoting, they're always changing. They may even have team and personnel changes. So the way that one person is interpreting the brand voice, or for example, how a caption should read on social media, is very different to a second one. And I've seen some businesses use that to an advantage and really clearly differentiate, oh, this is our Gen Z social media manager versus our old millennial one. And I think it's really important as startups to show up authentically in a way that can kind of push things forward and still be seen as Drovo and getting the messaging across. But I know that I've touched briefly upon employee and personnel changes, which are really common in startups. What kind of tools and systems do you recommend for startups who are naturally going to go through those different shifts, and you don't really want key person risk with one social media manager who was only with you for say 2 months and then moved on, but now your entire brand tone of voice is in the dark?
My approach, and you absolutely cover that I still use now, is brand guidelines. It is so whenever we have any mini meetings, where I am now, is we will always have guidelines, and that's like a really comprehensive document that includes who you are as a brand, your story, your values, your assets, how you talk, your tone of voice. Because again, sometimes it's so easy in your own department to live and breathe it. You actually want it to radiate across everything that you do. to your sales team, your supply. So we always do a brand immersion, and it is taking them through that sort of that consistency across different teams, but also for me, other markets as well. So if they can start up when you start to scale, especially if you go international or into markets, again, you want to keep that distinctiveness of who you are, how you brand, how you turn up as well. That was something I went on you didn't have, and you so hard to constantly how do I sound clear? Is it consistent? Am I the same brand? And you hate so many different messages. You almost lost who where is the brand, and that's why it's so important. Yeah, for me, it's the brand guideline. It's my Bible I constantly turning to and sharing with different teams, and it has really helped us to kind of drive our awareness, drive kind of recognition of who we are and what we stand for as a brand.
Amazing. Love that. And what are some of the most common mistakes that you see startups making when it comes to defining their brand identity?
I would say it's inconsistency. So whether it's using different assets, different color palettes, different messages, especially, that seems to be a biggie. Different messages on different channels. And again, when you think about the consumer, we see on average 4,000 to 10,000 brands a day, and the messages. So if you're kind of doing all of that, you're not going to stand out. So keeping consistent. Who are you? Are you trying to land? Consistent in terms of look and feel, but your message as well. Consistent in your brand identity. So in terms of look and feel, but also your tone of voice. You may need to shift depending on the channel, but there needs to be, I call it the red thread, like you across everything. So if one element was taken away, you know what it stands for, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to land.
Yeah.
And then the other is, maybe for me, for bringing marketing to your target audience, is super clear for your audience get who you are, because it resonates with them. And again, I think startups, we're so passionate about what we're doing in our own products. We lose the wider picture of is it what they when they need their one to understand it and does it resonate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what is one piece of advice that you would give to startups who are actually confused? And like you said, they are being inconsistent just because they're not really sure what their brand identity is. So what advice would you give to them to actually start from scratch and define and refine that brand identity?
I would say start with your why. And I know it's a few times, but I think it's the crux of how you start. Start with your why and everything else ladder from there. But then I would also, laying on that, walk to other teams, interact with other stakeholders, because sometimes as start, you're so invested in your own brand or what you want it to say and do, but it might cost along that journey to take people on that journey, get their input, get their thoughts, because that will really help you shape how you want it to run up. But it also I going, oh, I didn't think of that. That's not what you think. And I think that will really just help shape your brand, and it's getting the foundation right. Like having that, get that right, will help you, and you can build on that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Aman. I've definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure anyone listening has as well. As with the Bay podcast, we always have the same few questions that we ask any guests, which is sometimes more hard to answer than any of the others. So starting off with, who are 3 British Asians that are doing incredible pieces of work that you think the audience should check out?
I did find this cool. I was trying to find something in my industry that I could see. But outside of that, there's people that stood out to me, I think it's super inspiring. First, an amazing woman called the Ajwa. She is an entrepreneur who's done a lot of work in terms of the luxury space, and a consultant. She's really helped loads of startups really consult their business, especially in that area. It's so kind of niche, but it's such an amazing opportunity. But her passion and her energy is something for me that really shines through. And I know she's side hustles. I think it's just how she turns up is just amazing. And my second person is someone I've grown up with. It is a gentleman called Chief Rewell. He's done so much for diverse sports industry and a lot of events, in terms of including founded the Asian Football Awards a few years ago. But it's all about helping make change and to really celebrate South Asian talent and drive those meaningful kind of changes in the industry. So he's been amazing. The third one for me would be a company called Why Hungry, who I've just recently discovered. And I think being a foodie is something that I absolutely was like, I need to find out more about them. And it was set up by 2 amazing women called Siddhi and designer, and it was all about having chefs come to your home, cook for you, restaurant style food, and it's just something that I think is absolutely amazing. And it's amazing seeing their growth. They were on Dragon's Den recently, and they just where they're at now and how they're scaling their business. The one that I'm following quite closely.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And how can people find out more about you?
I would say find me on LinkedIn. I'm Aman Kler, with a K, Kler. So you can find me there and you can connect.
Amazing. And what can our audience do to help you?
I would say reach out to me if there are any key events where you want someone to talk. And that's something that, for me, I really want to help inspire the community from a marketing point of view. So, yeah, please do reach out to those key industry events where you're looking to bring my experience and I can talk through.
Amazing. Any final words from you?
I would say brand identity is such an important piece. I think it's such a crux of kind of who you are, how you grow in the long run, who you are, how consumers resonate with you. It needs to be almost like that heartbeat. So I think taking that time up front, I think sometimes it might feel like there's so much going on, a lot of time. But I would just go take that time, kind of step back and look at how do you want to be seen now and then 5 years' time. Because I think it's getting that time and the energy up front will be so important.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.